The slap echoed through Ridgemont City Hall's Municipal Services lobby, silencing every conversation. I stood slowly, shoulder throbbing, with one simple question: why is the water account in my name? The clerk's eyes darted between us before pulling a butter-yellow folder. Are you sure you want to see this? Inside weren't just overdue bills. It was a 3-year fraud scheme with my forged signatures and my stepfather's name on every page. As security rushed toward the disturbance, she whispered, "There's another file. Hardship exemptions. Someone used your mother's medical records." I looked at my mother. She avoided my eyes. Everything started unraveling right there at window 3. My name is Mara Whitlow, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a compliance specialist at Northline Compliance Group, which means I spend my days ensuring companies follow regulations and avoid legal pitfalls. It's ironic, really, considering I couldn't see the fraud happening under my own nose. That October morning started like any other in Ridgemont, North Carolina. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of dying leaves and distant wood smoke. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Vince Halbrook, my stepfather, barged into my home office. "Get your jacket. We're going to City Hall," he said, his weathered face tight with barely contained anger. "What's this about?" I asked, not moving from my desk. "Water bill situation. Need you there to sign some papers." I should have questioned it more, but Vince had been living with my mother for 8 years, and despite our strained relationship, I'd learned to pick my battles. The drive to City Hall was tense, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, country music crackling through his truck's blown speakers. The Ridgemont Municipal Building stood like a gray concrete monument to bureaucracy, its steps worn smooth by decades of citizens trudging up to pay fines, file permits, and argue about property lines. Inside, the familiar cocktail of floor wax, old paper, and stale coffee hit me immediately. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song, casting everyone in an unflattering greenish pallor. Window 3 at the Municipal Services counter was staffed by Tilda Crane, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. I'd seen her here before during my occasional visits to file business permits for Northline. "We need to handle the water account issue," Vince announced, pushing a form across the counter toward me. "Just need your signature on this payment arrangement." I picked up the document, scanning it quickly, a skill honed by years of compliance work. It was an agreement to assume responsibility for $3,847 in past due water bills at an address I didn't recognize. "I'm not signing this," I said, sliding it back. "This isn't my address. I've never lived on Marsh Street." "Just sign the damn paper, Mara," Vince hissed, his face reddening. "No." That's when his hand connected with my face, not a closed fist, but an open-palmed slap that snapped my head to the side and sent my glasses skittering across the counter. The sharp crack of it seemed to freeze time. A mother with 2 young children gasped. An elderly man waiting in line dropped his cane. Tilda Crane's hands flew to her mouth. "Security," Tilda called out, her voice cutting through the shocked silence. But even as 2 uniformed guards hustled over, she was already pulling files, her fingers flying across her keyboard with purpose. My cheek burned, and I could taste copper where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth, but I stood straight, drawing on the same composure that got me through hostile depositions and tense audit meetings. "Sir, you need to step back," one guard said to Vince, who was already retreating, perhaps realizing he'd crossed a line in front of a dozen witnesses. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you want to press charges?" the other guard asked me. Before I could answer, Tilda spoke up, her voice steady but urgent. "I'm pulling the full account history. There are some irregularities you need to see." She glanced meaningfully at the screen, then at me. "All of it? The water account? The exemption files? Everything?" She printed page after page, the old dot matrix printer chattering like an angry squirrel. The stack she handed me was thick enough to require both hands. On top was the water service agreement for 451 Marsh Street, dated 3 years ago. The signature read, "Mara Whitlow," but even at a glance, I could tell it wasn't mine. The M was too angular, the W too compressed. "There's more," Tilda said quietly, sliding another folder across the counter. This one was marked Hardship Exemption, Medical. Inside were copies of my mother's hospital records from her gallbladder surgery 2 years ago. Attached to applications for utility payment deferrals, all signed with my name, all forged. The security guards were still flanking Vince, who stood near the entrance looking like a cornered animal. Other clerks had stopped their work to watch. Someone was recording on their phone, but all I could focus on was the paper trail in front of me, evidence of a systematic fraud that used my identity like a credit card. "This goes beyond water," Tilda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your name appears on 2 illegal hookup reports and a co-ownership registration for a property on the South Side, all filed through this office, all in the last 3 years. The implications hit me like a second slap. This wasn't just about dodging utility bills. This was identity theft, document fraud, and potentially thousands of dollars in liability, all under my name, all orchestrated by the man my mother had chosen to trust. To understand how I missed this, you need to understand Vince Halbrook. At 48, he was the kind of man who always had a scheme brewing, each one just legitimate enough to avoid outright criminal charges. He called himself a freelance contractor, but his real talent was working the margins cash jobs, under-the-table deals, and an encyclopedic knowledge of municipal loopholes. He'd entered our lives 8 years ago when I was 24. Already established in my career while my mother, Diane, was recovering from my father's death. She was vulnerable, drowning in grief and bills, and Vince appeared like a life raft handy around the house, charming when he needed to be, always ready with a solution that required just a small favor. The drive home from City Hall was silent. My mother sat in the back seat of my car while Vince followed in his truck, presumably heading back to their house. I'd insisted on driving her separately, needing answers. "How long have you known?" I asked, watching her in the rearview mirror. Diane stared out the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. At 55, she still carried herself like the bank teller she'd been for 30 years precise, conservative, terrified of any hint of financial scandal. "He said it was temporary," she finally whispered. "Just until his contracts picked up. He said the bills were mistakes, that the city had overcharged us, that using your credit was the only way to buy time for appeals." "Appeals for what?" "Mom. For bills at addresses where I've never lived." "I didn't know about those," her voice cracked. "I only knew about the house bills. He said if we didn't handle it his way, we'd lose everything. The house, my retirement savings, everything." I pulled into her driveway, my childhood home, a modest ranch that my father had paid off before he died. Vince's truck was already there, and I could see him through the kitchen window, pacing like a caged animal. "You signed those medical exemption forms," I said. It wasn't a question. "He wrote them. I just signed. He said it was legal since I was genuinely sick, that we qualified for hardship programs." She looked at me then, tears streaming. "I never wanted to involve you, Mara, but he said your credit was the only thing good enough to guarantee the deferrals." The betrayal stung worse than the slap. Not because of the money I could handle financial fraud. It was the casual destruction of trust, the way they'd used my name like a blank check while I sat at family dinners, helped with groceries, and tried to maintain some relationship with my mother despite Vince's presence. Inside, Vince was ready for war. "You had no right to air family business in public," he snarled. "That scene at City Hall, you probably cost me 3 contracts. You forged my signature, multiple times. That's a felony." "Prove it," he shot back, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I don't have to prove it. The city will. They have handwriting analysts. Vince, they have security footage of who filed those forms. They have digital timestamps." He laughed, an ugly sound. "You think they care about a few grand in water bills? City Hall's got bigger fish to fry." "Maybe, but I bet they care about fraudulent hardship exemptions. That's stealing from programs meant for people who actually need help." I turned to my mother. Did you know he registered a company called Halbrook Utilities Partners? Did you know he's been collecting refund checks? The color drained from Diane's face. What refunds? That's when I knew she was more victim than accomplice. Vince had played us both, using her fear and my identity to construct his house of cards. But understanding his methods also revealed his weakness. Every utility scam left a paper trail, and paper trails were my specialty. Here's what's going to happen, I said, drawing on every negotiation tactic I'd learned in corporate compliance. You're going to come clean about everything, every forged document, every false application, every redirected refund, because tomorrow morning, I'm filing reports with the city's internal audit office, the state's utility commission, and the postal service for mail fraud. You wouldn't dare, Vince spat. You'd be sending your own mother to jail. No, I said, looking directly at Diane. She'll cooperate and testify. They'll offer her administrative penalties at worst. You're the one who orchestrated this. You're the one who profited. The room crackled with tension. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked steadily, marking the seconds until one of us broke the standoff. I knew then that my relationship with my mother would never be the same. But I also knew that Vince had given me something valuable in that slap at City Hall witnesses, documentation, and the moral clarity to fight back. You have 24 hours, I told him, gathering my purse. Use them wisely. As I left my childhood home, I could hear them arguing, Diane's voice high and frightened, Vince's low and threatening. But I didn't turn back. I had work to do, evidence to compile, and a fraud to unravel. The water bill was just the beginning. The next morning, I arrived at City Hall before it opened, armed with a compliance specialist's best weapons color-coded folders, a timeline spreadsheet, and a digital recorder. Tilda Crane was already at her desk, looking like she'd been expecting me. I stayed late yesterday, she said quietly, glancing around to ensure we were alone. Pulled everything I could find. You need to see this. She led me to a small conference room typically used for payment plans and handed me a banker's box. Inside were photocopies of every document filed under my name in the past 3 years. The scope was staggering. Let's start with the water accounts, Tilda said, spreading papers across the table. The original application for 451 Marsh Street was submitted online through a public library computer. We log IP addresses for all electronic submissions. I examined the printout. The application was submitted at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when I would have been in client meetings. The signature was a scanned image, slightly pixelated, clearly lifted from another document. Here's where it gets interesting, Tilda continued, pulling out another sheet. Every forged document uses the same scanned signature. See the tiny ink spot near the W. It's identical in every instance. Someone had one sample of your signature and used it repeatedly. My old lease, I breathed, remembering. When I moved out of my apartment 3 years ago, Vince offered to return the keys to the landlord. The lease agreement would have had my signature. Tilda nodded. That tracks with the timeline. First fraudulent application was filed 2 weeks after that date. We spent the next 2 hours constructing a forensic map of the fraud. Each water account followed the same pattern: online application, immediate enrollment in payment deferral programs, then systematic applications for rebates and adjustments. The Marsh Street property alone had received $4,200 in meter misread adjustments over 3 years. These adjustments were all approved, I asked. Different clerks, different reasons, Tilda explained. One was for a supposed leak, another for meter replacement, a third for estimated billing errors, spread out over time, using different windows. No one would notice the pattern, except... She pulled out a yellow form. This refund request was flagged last month. The amount was too large, $100 for systematic overbilling. That's what triggered the review that led to the past due notices. The system finally caught up. Where did the refund checks go? Prepaid debit cards. All refunds under $3,500 can be loaded onto cards instead of paper checks. It's meant to help people without bank accounts, but it's also untraceable cash, I finished. The picture was becoming clear. Vince had created a sophisticated scheme that exploited every weakness in the municipal utility system online applications that bypassed in-person verification, refund programs meant to help struggling families, and a bureaucracy too overwhelmed to connect the dots. "There's more," Tilda said, her expression grim. The two illegal hookups were reported by neighbors but listed as resolved after the property owner provided documentation. Want to guess whose name was on the owner documents? I didn't need to guess. The papers showed my name on properties I'd never seen, in neighborhoods I'd never visited. Each had been used to establish utility accounts, rack up bills, then abandon them after extracting maximum refunds. "The co-ownership registration is the worst," Tilda continued. "It's for Vince's previous apartment. By adding you as co-owner, he was able to transfer old utility debts into your name while qualifying for new customer promotions at his current address. I photographed every document with my phone, creating my own digital trail. The metadata would prove when I discovered the fraud critical for establishing my innocence." "Why are you helping me?" I asked Tilda as we packed up the evidence. She was quiet for a moment. "My daughter went through something similar. Ex-husband destroyed her credit, took out loans in her name. Took her years to recover. When I saw that slap yesterday, saw your face when you realized what was happening, I couldn't just file it away. I need official copies of everything, and a way to preserve the digital records before anyone can alter them." "Already done," she said, handing me a USB drive. "Downloaded the files last night before the system's daily backup, and I've initiated a preservation hold on the accounts. Internal audit will be notified this morning." "Won't this get you in trouble?" She smiled thinly. "I've been here 23 years. I know which rules can bend and which ones break. Helping a fraud victim access their own records, that's just good customer service." I left City Hall with a box of evidence and a clear strategy. The water bills had exposed a web of fraud extending far beyond simple utility theft. Vince had commercialized identity theft, turning my name into a revenue stream. But he'd made one crucial error. He'd gotten greedy. That final $3,100 refund request had triggered the system's alerts, and now his paper trail led straight back to him. The water bill wasn't just a bill, it was a thread that, when pulled, would unravel 3 years of systematic fraud, and I was just getting started on pulling it. Back at my home office, I transformed my dining table into a war room. Every surface was covered with documents, color-coded sticky notes, and printed screenshots. My laptop displayed 3 monitors worth of data utility regulations, fraud statutes, and City Hall's whistleblower policies. Being a compliance specialist meant I understood something Vince didn't. Bureaucracies have immune systems. When properly activated, they could turn a small infection into a full-body response. I just needed to trigger the right antibodies. First, I built the evidence matrix. Using software designed for regulatory audits, I created a timeline linking every forged signature to specific dates, locations, and financial transactions. The patterns were damning. Every online application originated from the same library computer terminal between 2 to 4 p.m. Signature files showed identical compression artifacts, indicating the same source scan. Refund requests always came exactly 91 days after account opening, just past the review period. Dollar amounts stayed just under reporting thresholds: $3, $499, $2, $999, $4, $499. Next, I drafted my whistleblower complaint to the Ridgemont Municipal Services Internal Control Office. The key was framing it not as a personal dispute, but as systematic abuse of taxpayer-funded programs. Evidence indicates coordinated exploitation of hardship exemptions, resulting in approximately $12,480 in fraudulent refunds diverted from programs designed for legitimate low-income residents. My phone rang. It was my mother, her voice shaky. "Vince says you're overreacting, that we can work this out as a family." "Did he tell you about the Halbrook Utilities Partners account?" I asked. "Did he mention that every refund went to prepaid cards in his company's name?" Silence. "Mom, I need you to make a choice. If you cooperate with investigators, Provide testimony about which documents you signed unknowingly versus under duress. You'll likely face only administrative penalties, but if you stay silent, you become an accomplice to felony fraud. He says no prosecutor would charge him over utility bills. He's wrong. This isn't just about utilities. It's wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, and forgery. The federal threshold for wire fraud is $1,000. He crossed that with the first refund. I heard her crying softly. What do I need to do? Write down everything. Every document he asked you to sign, every explanation he gave, every time he accessed your medical records, date it, sign it, and have it notarized, then find somewhere safe to stay. After we hung up, I initiated Phase 2, creating legal firewalls. I contacted the 3 credit bureaus to freeze my credit and place fraud alerts. I filed a police report for the identity theft, not for immediate action, but to establish a paper trail. Then I called my bank to flag any attempts to open accounts using my information. The crucial step was leveraging City Hall's own systems against Vince. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all documents, applications, and digital records associated with my name and social security number. By law, they had to preserve everything pending the request, preventing any convenient disappearances. Then I drafted something special, a demand for accounting, under Municipal Code Section 47-3.2, requiring full disclosure of all refunds, credits, and transfers associated with the fraudulent accounts. This would force City Hall to trace every penny, creating an audit trail Vince couldn't erase. My corporate experience taught me another trick. I sent a litigation hold notice to 5 departments' utilities: internal audit, information technology, finance, and legal. Each department would now be required to preserve all related records, creating redundant backups Vince couldn't possibly access. But the masterstroke was my call to Tilda that afternoon. I'm filing for whistleblower status under the city's Fraud Prevention Act. As the employee who discovered and reported the fraud, you're entitled to protections and potentially a percentage of recovered funds. I didn't know that was possible, she said. Most people don't, but it transforms you from potential defendant to protected witness. File your report today, before my complaint lands. First reporter gets the strongest protections. That evening, I compiled everything into a comprehensive package: 47 pages of evidence, timeline analysis, regulatory violations, and calculated damages, but I didn't send it immediately. Instead, I scheduled it for automated delivery at 8:00 a.m. to 6 recipients simultaneously: Internal Audit, the District Attorney's Office, the State Utilities Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, the U.S. Postal Inspector, and the local FBI field office's white-collar crime unit. Overkill. Maybe? But Vince had spent 3 years treating my identity like a personal ATM. He'd gambled that the system was too slow, too fragmented, too indifferent to catch him. He was about to learn that the same bureaucratic complexity that enabled his scheme could also crush it when wielded by someone who understood its pressure points. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You don't know who you're messing with. I smiled grimly and added the message to my evidence file. Noting the timestamp and number, every threat was just another piece of evidence, another nail in the case I was building. Vince thought he was playing checkers, moving utilities around like game pieces, but I was playing chess, and I'd just positioned my pieces for checkmate. The water bill had started this game. By tomorrow morning, it would end it. At 3 a.m., my security camera alerted me to movement outside. Vince's truck was idling at the end of my driveway, headlights off. I watched through the app as he sat there for 20 minutes before driving away. I added the footage to my evidence file. By 7 a.m., the counterattack began. My professional email filled with notifications from job sites, professional forums, and LinkedIn. Someone had posted reviews claiming I was mentally unstable, violent, and under investigation for embezzlement. Each post came from freshly created accounts, all posted within the same hour. Classic Vince, but he'd made another mistake. The posts all contained specific details about my employer and clients, that only someone with inside knowledge would have. Digital breadcrumbs leading right back to him. At 8:01 a.m., my scheduled reports deployed across 6 agencies. By 8:30, my phone was ringing. Ridgemont Internal Audit wanted an immediate meeting. The State Utilities Commission was opening a formal investigation. The postal inspector had questions about mail fraud. But Vince's biggest error came at 10 a.m. when he walked into City Hall demanding to settle this like adults. Tilda called me immediately. "He's here at window 2, demanding we delete all the past due notices and correct the signature records. He's making a scene." "Is he recording?" "No, but we are. Every window has audio and video since the renovation." "Keep him talking. Ask him to specify which signatures he claims are incorrect. Get him to identify which accounts he wants modified." I raced to City Hall, arriving to find Vince red-faced and shouting at a clerk. "I've been a taxpayer in this city for 15 years. This is harassment. Those accounts were authorized by family members." "Sir," the clerk said calmly, "you'll need to provide power of attorney documentation for any accounts not in your name." "I don't need papers to handle family business." Vince slammed his hand on the counter. "Just pull up the accounts and fix them." That's when RMS investigator Patricia Williams entered the lobby, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She was exactly what you'd expect from municipal enforcement: gray suit, sensible shoes, and the demeanor of someone who'd seen every scam twice. "Mr. Halbrook, I need you to step away from the counter." Vince's face cycled through emotions: surprise, anger, then calculated innocence. "What's this about?" "We've received a formal complaint regarding fraudulent utility accounts. I have some questions." "I don't have to answer anything without a lawyer." "That's your right. However, I should inform you that we've already pulled security footage from the library showing you submitting online applications. We have your vehicle on traffic cameras at the times of submission, and we have this." She produced a printout, the metadata from the signature file, showing it was created 3 years ago from a scanned document, then used 17 times across multiple accounts. "That proves nothing," Vince blustered. "Mr. Halbrook, are you aware that utility fraud affecting federally funded programs is a felony? Are you aware that systematic fraud over $10,000 triggers mandatory prosecution?" The number hit him like cold water. I watched him do the math: all those refunds, all those accounts. His shoulders sagged slightly. "I want to make a deal," he said quietly. "That's not my department. You'll need to discuss that with the district attorney." Williams turned to the officers. "Please escort Mr. Halbrook to the station for formal questioning." As they led him past me, Vince's mask finally slipped. "You destroyed this family," he hissed. "Your mother will never forgive you." "No," I said calmly. "You destroyed it the day you forged my signature. I'm just cleaning up the mess." After he was gone, Williams approached me. "Your documentation is impressive. Most victims don't provide such thorough evidence." "Occupational hazard. I investigate compliance for a living. We'll need your full cooperation. This goes beyond Ridgemont. He's been running similar schemes in 2 other counties. Your evidence broke open a larger case." I felt a mix of vindication and exhaustion. "What about my mother?" "She's agreed to cooperate fully. Given the evidence of coercion and her limited involvement, the DA is recommending pretrial diversion with community service. She was a victim too, just in a different way." That afternoon, I sat in the same conference room where Tilda had shown me the evidence, now giving my formal statement to investigators. They showed me the full scope: 31 fraudulent accounts across 3 counties, over $186,000 in stolen refunds and services, affecting dozens of victims who hadn't yet discovered their identities were compromised. The water bill had been just the visible tip of a massive fraud ecosystem. By demanding I sign that payment arrangement, Vince had inadvertently exposed his entire operation, his greed and arrogance striking me in public. Creating witnesses had given me the momentum to unravel everything. "One more thing," Williams said as we concluded. "The city will be issuing full refunds to you for any fraudulent charges, plus damages, and there's a crime victims fund that can help with credit repair and legal costs." I thought about the anonymous text, the online harassment, The 3 years of stolen identity. Vince had played dirty, but he'd underestimated the power of playing by the rules when you knew exactly which rules to invoke. 3 weeks later, City Hall's main conference room was packed for the Public Internal Audit Committee hearing. Word had spread through Ridgemont about the utility fraud case, drawing reporters, citizens who suspected they might be victims, and curious observers who simply loved municipal drama. I sat in the front row beside my attorney, a sharp young woman from legal aid who'd taken the case pro bono after hearing about its scope. Across the aisle, Vince sat with his court-appointed defender, wearing an ill-fitting suit and the hollow look of a man watching his schemes collapse. Tilda Crane took the witness stand first, walking the committee through her discovery. She'd prepared a PowerPoint that displayed the forged documents side by side with legitimate signatures, the differences glaring under magnification. When I pulled the rebate audit file, Form 19C, I found something unusual. Tilda testified, clicking to a new slide. Every refund request was filed exactly 91 days after account creation, always on Tuesdays, always between 2 and 4 p.m. The next slide showed post office records. These refunds were mailed to a P.O. box registered to Halbrook Utilities Partners. But here's the interesting part. She clicked again. Security footage from the post office shows Mr. Halbrook collecting prepaid debit cards from this box on the same dates funds were withdrawn from ATMs at the casino on Highway 47. A murmur rippled through the room. Vince's gambling habits were well known, but seeing the direct line from stolen city funds to casino ATMs was damning. Committee Chairman Roberts leaned into his microphone. Ms. Crane, can you explain why these fraudulent accounts weren't detected sooner? The scheme was specifically designed to exploit our audit gaps, Tilda replied. By keeping individual transactions under $3,500, using different clerks, and spacing out requests, it stayed below automatic review thresholds. It was only when Mr. Halbrook got greedy filing a $3,100 single refund that the system flagged it. When my turn came to testify, I focused on the pattern of escalation. The fraud started small, a single water account at a property he'd previously rented. When that succeeded, he expanded to properties throughout the county, eventually creating a portfolio of false accounts generating steady refund income. Ms. Whitlow, committee member Jackson asked, why do you think he involved you and your mother? Control and credibility, I answered. My credit score was 8 on 15. My mother's medical records provided legitimate hardship documentation. We were tools to him, my identity for account creation, her illness for sympathy and exemptions. The smoking gun came when Patricia Williams presented the digital forensics. Mr. Halbrook made one crucial error. He accessed the online application system from his home IP address twice both times after hours at the library. These applications used the same browser fingerprint as hundreds of others filed from the library. She clicked through technical data that showed Vince's digital signature all over the fraud. Furthermore, when we examined the prepaid cards, we found he'd registered them using his cell phone number. Every transaction is tracked. But the real showstopper was Williams' final revelation. During our investigation, we discovered Mr. Halbrook had purchased a list of deceased residents from a data broker. He was preparing to expand the scheme using dead people's identities. The room erupted. Committee members huddled in heated discussion while reporters frantically typed on their phones. Vince's attorney objected, but the evidence was already in the record. Chairman Roberts gavelled for order. Mr. Halbrook, would you like to address the committee? Vince stood slowly, his bravado completely gone. I need those programs, he said, his voice barely audible. The economy, my back problems, the contractors screwing me over. Sir, Roberts interrupted, are you admitting to the fraud? Vince's attorney grabbed his arm, but it was too late. I was just trying to survive. The city wastes millions on... That's enough, his attorney said firmly, pulling him back down. The committee recessed for deliberation. In the hallway, my mother approached, looking fragile but determined. She'd testified earlier about Vince's manipulation. how he'd isolated her from me, convinced her that cooperation was the only way to save their home. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have been stronger." "You were scared," I said. He counted on that. When the committee reconvened, their findings were swift and severe. They referred the case for immediate criminal prosecution, authorized full forensic audits of all utility accounts for the past 5 years, and approved new security measures requiring in-person verification for all hardship applications. But the moment that truly ended, it came when Chairman Roberts addressed Vince directly. "Mr. Halbrook, your systematic exploitation of programs designed to help struggling families is particularly reprehensible. You stole from the very safety net that exists to help people in genuine need." As security escorted Vince out, he turned back once. Our eyes met across the room, the stepfather who'd seen me as nothing more than a credit score to exploit, and the stepdaughter who'd refused to be his victim. He looked away first. The water bill that started everything was entered into evidence as Exhibit A, a simple document that had unraveled a criminal enterprise. But more than that, it was proof that paperwork could be a weapon, that bureaucracy could deliver justice, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply pulling the thread and watching everything unravel. The committee voted unanimously to pursue maximum criminal charges and civil asset forfeiture. Every penny Vince had stolen would be tracked down and returned. The house of cards he'd built on forged signatures and stolen identities had collapsed completely, bringing him down with it. The Ridgemont County District Attorney's Office was a different world from City Hall, all marble floors and heavy wooden doors that spoke of serious consequences. 6 weeks after the hearing, I sat across from Assistant DA Michael Torres, who'd been assigned the case. "Ms. Whitlow, we're prepared to file 17 felony counts against Vincent Halbrook," he said, spreading documents across his desk. "Forgery, identity theft, wire fraud, mail fraud, and theft of public services. The federal charges alone carry up to 20 years. What about the expanded investigation?" Torres pulled out another file, thick as a phone book. "Your evidence opened Pandora's box. We've identified utility fraud in 3 counties: water, electricity, gas, even garbage collection. Total theft exceeds $186,200. 43 victims so far, including 12 deceased individuals whose identities were compromised." The scope still staggered me. What started as a water bill had revealed an entire underground economy of utility fraud. Vince wasn't just a small-time scammer, he'd industrialized identity theft. "We need to discuss your mother," Torres continued. "Diane Whitlow has been fully cooperative. She's provided crucial testimony about how Halbrook isolated her, controlled household finances, and coerced her participation. Given these factors and her limited role, we're offering pretrial diversion." "What does that mean exactly?" 100 hours of community service, specifically helping elderly residents understand and protect against financial fraud. 2 years of probation, no criminal record if completed successfully. She'll also need to testify at trial. It was fair, more than fair. My mother had been manipulated, but she'd still signed documents she knew were questionable. This gave her a path to redemption without destroying her life. "There's one more thing," Torres said, his expression shifting. "Halbrook's assets. We're pursuing civil forfeiture of everything purchased with stolen funds. But there's a complication: the house. My childhood home, the one my father had paid off, where my mother still lived, now tangled in Vince's web of debt and fraud. Halbrook took out 3 liens against the property using his fraudulent utility company as collateral for business loans. The house is technically encumbered for $78,000. My stomach dropped. Even in defeat, Vince had one last card to play. However," Torres continued, "since these liens were secured through criminal enterprise, they're voidable, but it requires your mother to file specific paperwork challenging their validity. As the primary identity theft victim, you could also petition for emergency relief under the Crime Victims Act." That afternoon, I met with my mother at her attorney's office. She'd aged years and weeks, the reality of Vince's betrayal etching lines on her face, but there was also something new: determination. "I've signed everything," she said, pushing a stack of papers toward me. Power of attorney for the house issues, affidavits about the coercion, witness statements for trial. I want to make this right. Her attorney, a silver-haired woman named Janet Park, walked us through the plan. We file emergency petitions to void the fraudulent liens, transfer the property into a protective trust, and sever any claim Halbrook might make. The house will be protected, but Diane must maintain it and can't sell without court approval for 2 years. I just want to keep Dad's house, my mother said quietly. It's all I have left of him. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Vince, facing overwhelming evidence and decades in prison, wanted to make a deal. His attorney contacted Torres about a plea agreement, full confession, in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's offering to reveal everything, Torres told me over the phone, including utility fraud operations in neighboring states he learned about in online forums. Apparently, there's an entire network teaching these schemes. The idea that Vince was just one node in a larger criminal network was chilling, but it also meant our case could help shut down similar operations across the region. At the plea hearing 2 weeks later, I watched Vince admit to everything in excruciating detail, how he'd started with small bills, justified it as borrowing from a system that owed him, how success bred greed, how he'd viewed my mother and me as resources to exploit, not family to protect. I targeted Mara because her credit was perfect, he stated flatly. I kept Diane isolated so she'd depend on me. I knew exactly what I was doing. Judge Harrison, a stern woman with 30 years on the bench, wasn't moved by his cooperation. Mr. Halbrook, you systematically defrauded public utilities designed to help the vulnerable. You betrayed family trust. You stole identities from the deceased. Your cooperation, while valuable, doesn't erase the harm you've caused. She sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison, with 5 years supervised release and full restitution to all victims. The courtroom was silent as bailiffs led him away in shackles. Outside the courthouse, my mother and I stood in the crisp November air. The man who'd controlled her life, threatened her security, and stolen her daughter's identity was gone, not just from our lives, but from society, locked away where he couldn't hurt anyone else. The house is safe, I told her. The liens are void. Your probation officer says you're doing well with the community service. She nodded, then surprised me by saying, I've been thinking, maybe I should sell the house anyway. Too many bad memories now. Start fresh somewhere smaller, cleaner. It was her choice to make, finally, truly her choice. Vince's control was broken. His financial chains shattered. The water bill had started it all, but we were ending it on our own terms. The final confrontation came 6 months later at a restitution hearing that would determine exactly how much Vince owed his victims. City Hall's largest conference room had been reserved for the proceeding, packed with victims, attorneys, and media covering what had become known as the Ridgemont Utilities scandal. I arrived early with my complete documentation, every forged document, every fraudulent refund, every piece of evidence meticulously organized into a timeline that stretched across 3 presentation boards. As lead victim and primary whistleblower, I would present the comprehensive damage assessment. Vince was brought in wearing Orange County jail scrubs, his former swagger completely gone. He'd lost weight, his hair gone gray at the temples. Prison had stripped away his con man's polish, leaving just a middle-aged criminal facing the consequences. Judge Harrison presided again, her expression stern as she reviewed the victim impact statements. 43 people had filed claims, from elderly residents whose deceased spouses' identities were stolen to young families whose credit was destroyed by fraudulent accounts. Ms. Whitlow, the judge said, please present your consolidated findings. I stood, remote in hand, and began the presentation that would seal Vince's financial fate. Your Honor, through forensic accounting and investigation cooperation, we've documented total theft of $186, $200 in fraudulent refunds, plus $47,000 in unpaid services diverted through false accounts. Click, the screen showed a web of connections between properties, accounts, and shell companies. The defendant created Halbrook Utilities Partners specifically to receive stolen funds. Every refund was converted to prepaid debit cards, making them nearly untraceable. Nearly, the judge asked. The defendant made one critical error. He used his personal cell phone to activate the cards and withdrew funds at specific ATMs near casinos. We've tracked 89% of the stolen money. I presented the evidence methodically, timestamp analyses, signature comparisons, IP addresses, security footage, but the most damaging evidence came from Vince's own records, seized from his storage unit handwritten logs of every scam, every forged signature, every stolen refund. He'd kept receipts like trophies. The impact extends beyond financial loss, I continued. Victims spent thousands on credit repair, legal fees, and securing their identities. The city spent over $100,000 investigating and prosecuting this case. The true cost approaches $500,000. When I finished, other victims spoke. An elderly man whose late wife's medical records were used for fraudulent hardship claims. A single mother who discovered 5 utility accounts in her name across 3 counties. Each story added weight to the mountain of evidence against Vince. Then came the moment I'd orchestrated carefully. Tilda Crane took the stand with a final piece of evidence, a USB drive containing data from Vince's attempted cover-up. 2 days before his arrest, Tilda testified, Mr. Halbrook accessed the municipal system using a stolen employee login. He attempted to delete records and alter signatures in the database. However, our backup system captured every change. She clicked through screenshots showing Vince's desperate attempts to erase his digital footprints. He actually made things worse. His tampering created an additional data trail linking him to accounts we hadn't yet discovered. The courtroom stirred as people realized Vince's final act of desperation had only tightened the noose around his neck. Judge Harrison had heard enough. Mr. Halbrook, your systematic exploitation of public utilities represents one of the most extensive fraud schemes this county has seen. You've shown no genuine remorse, only regret at being caught. She turned to the calculations. Total restitution is set at $486,750, including all stolen funds, investigative costs, and victim damages. This amount will be garnished from any income, tax refunds, or assets for the remainder of your life if necessary. But I have nothing, Vince protested, his first words of the hearing. You had nothing legitimately, the judge corrected. The forensic accounting revealed hidden assets vehicles titled to associates, equipment purchased with stolen funds, even a boat registered under your brother's name but paid for with fraudulent refunds. All will be liquidated. The final twist came when Ada Torres stood. Your Honor, we've reached a settlement with 3 insurance companies that unknowingly processed fraudulent claims. They've agreed to contribute $50,000 to a victim compensation fund, which will provide immediate relief while we pursue full restitution from the defendant. As Vince was led away, he passed close to where I sat. For a moment, our eyes met. Gone was the manipulative stepfather who'd terrorized my mother and stolen my identity. In his place was a broken man facing a lifetime of debt. He could never escape fitting justice for someone who'd trapped others in financial chains. Outside City Hall, where this all began with a slap and a water bill, I stood with my mother. She'd completed her community service early, helping dozens of seniors protect themselves from scams like Vince's. The house was safe, her credit recovering, her life finally her own. You know what the ironic part is, she said quietly. If he'd just asked for help, really asked instead of scheming, we would have tried to help him. But that wasn't who Vince Halbrook was. He was a predator who saw family as prey, utilities as an ATM, and fraud as a career. The water bill had exposed him. The investigation had trapped him, and justice had finally crushed him under the weight of his own greed. As we walked away from City Hall, I thought about that moment 6 months ago when Vince struck me at Window 3. That slap had cost him everything: his freedom, his schemes, his carefully constructed house of forged cards, all because he couldn't resist one final power play, one last attempt at control. The water bill was paid in full, and so, finally, was Vince Halbrook. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please comment below and share your thoughts on this tale of justice served. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. And don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover this video. Your support helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them.